Hi, I'm Jason Frazier, and this is 4 Leadership Motions for Everyone. The 4 leadership motions are tools that you can use to help you get unstuck or to set yourself and your team up to make better progress right from the start. My wife / co-founder / co-author and I released a book in 2023 where we lay out the 4 leadership motions in detail, and this workshop comes straight from the book. It was designed as a practical introduction to the 4 leadership motions that will help you put them to immediate use. This workshop is going to alternate between some brief illustrations of each leadership motion, followed by an exercise where you employ that motion on a challenge that's relevant to you today, and then a brief moment of reflection. At the end, you will have some new ideas on how to make progress in your challenge, and you'll be familiar with some new tools that can help you make progress anywhere. For this workshop, you're going to need a few pieces of paper and a pen. And if you have Post-it notes, that's great. It makes everything a little bit easier, but no problem if you don't. For today, regardless of what your job is, I want you to think of yourself as a leader. There are so many ways that people lead in every part of their life, maybe at work, in your families, in your community. Leaders channel energy in a direction. So the one thing that every leader needs to be able to do is very quickly create focus. So before we dig into the presentation, we're going to start by finding some focus. And I said we were going to move you forward on a problem that you're actually dealing with right now. So first, we'll have to find the right problem. To find our focus for today's workshop, we're going to use a pattern called Externalize, Organize, Focus, or EOF. This pattern is useful for both teams and individuals. For teams, it helps ensure that everyone is contributing and everyone is heard. But for you as an individual, it helps you step outside of the swirl that's in your head and gives you access to your best thoughts in a way that makes it easier to process those thoughts. So grab your Post-its if you have them, or some paper if you don't. And here's your prompt. I want you to write down 10 challenges in your work or personal life that are on your mind right now. Okay? Think about blockers to your progress that you want to resolve, or maybe answer the question, what do you need to fix? Okay? 2 minutes. I want you to pause the video, set a timer, and come up with as many ideas as you can. Go. Okay. Now that you've got your ideas, I'm going to give you 1 minute to mark the 5 ideas out of those 10 that are most important to you right now. So if you're working on plain paper, just put a star next to the top 5 ideas or some other mark, a check mark, whatever works for you. If you're working with Post-its, you can separate the Post-its into 2 piles. The pile that's more interesting to move forward with on the right, and the pile that's less interesting to move forward with on the left. Okay? Pause the video and set a timer for 1 minute. All right, now I want you to number those 5 ideas in order of importance. Okay, so take a look at everything that you've got in front of you, whether it's on Post-its or on paper, and just see if you can put a number 1 on the one that's most important to move forward with, all the way down to 5. Okay, set a timer for 1 minute. Great. Now, I want you to take that number 1 item that you have, the most important one, and rewrite it as a complete, simple sentence that declares an intention. Okay? We're taking your statement from something that you need to do to something that you're actively opting into. You are going to do this. We'll call this your challenge statement, and we're going to use it as we move forward. Pause the video and rewrite. Take 2 minutes if you have to. Now that we have something to focus on, we can get into it. So this is the printer that changed our lives. In 2002, my co-author Janice was one of 7 founders of a company, and the partner doing all the sales needed a printer, and they argued for at least 10 minutes at their weekly founder meeting for 6 months. At the time, they were billing about $200 an hour. So they paid approximately $5,400 for a printer that cost the equivalent of about 2 hours of revenue. Now, I'm all for spending time debating things that are important, but there's just way too much to do in the world to waste time on things that are ultimately inconsequential. Janice should have just gone out and bought the printer herself. So since then, for 20-some years, we've been examining the question, how do we go farther, move faster, and for God's sake, reduce the drama? And in that time, through research and trial and error, and levels of commitment that probably seemed a little nuts to some of our colleagues, we figured out a few things and we found or invented some specialized tools that can help us make progress. So I'm going to show you an example of why we need specialized tools to help us move forward. Let's imagine that we have 3 people and they're going to shake hands as if meeting each other for the first time. Okay? 3 people, 3 handshakes. Very simple. Now let's add a 4th person and count all the handshakes. Boom! We've gone from 3 to 6. We added 1 person and doubled the handshakes. Now, when I do this workshop in person, I always call up volunteers from the audience and have them shake hands with each other in this way. We start with 3 and then we go to 4. And every time we add that 4th person in, not only do we see that we've doubled the handshakes, but the exercise itself becomes very awkward as people try to reach around each other and figure out which hand they're supposed to shake next and things like that. And it's a perfect demonstration of the complication that we're talking about here. And there's a formula for how this works. It's n times n minus 1 over 2. The formula describes the number of relationships based on the number of people. So 3 people, 3 relationships. 4 people, 6 relationships. 5 people is 10. 6 is 15. 10 is 45, and so on. So even when you think you have a small team, you're thinking, oh, we're only 10 people. You have an outrageous amount of communication overhead on that team. Now, this graphic here that I'm sharing was originally created to describe Metcalfe's law, which describes the value of a telecommunications network based on the number of nodes in the network. For a telecom network, having lots of nodes is a great thing, right? It gives you lots of options to be able to communicate with other people. For teamwork, though, it's not, because people make decisions when they agree to stop talking. People stop talking when they feel understood. And understanding happens between individual pairs of brains. So the first major thing that went wrong in Janice's printer conversation was the sheer number of relationships to deal with. So when they tried to make a decision among 7 equal partners, there were too many relationships involved. 21 different relationships to manage. But that wasn't the only problem. There are 4 underlying problems that slow down progress and fill our lives with drama. The first, our starting point. We all might think we're talking about the same thing, but we're each coming from a unique starting point. Our understanding of the problem is different, which leads us to different conclusions about how to solve it. Number 2, we focus on outputs rather than outcomes, and we get locked into task lists that either produce a weak solution or sometimes no solution at all. Number 3, too many handshakes. We have the wrong people involved, we have too many people involved, and we're not getting the best out of our contributors. And number 4, our decision criteria are wrong, and it's preventing us from making decisions that we can actually move forward with. Each of these 4 challenges are reflected in the 4 leadership motions. Here's the big reveal then. The 4 leadership motions are orient honestly, value outcomes, leverage the brains, and make durable decisions. I think of it like the spinner on a board game. When you're in a leadership jam, just spin. No matter which one you land on, if you engage emotion in that direction, you're going to get unstuck. Today, we'll talk about each one in turn and do a little exercise to work you through it. But first, I'll preface with our magic secret. Point A, point B thinking. If we want to get somewhere, we need to know where we're starting from and where we're going. This simple point on its own could transform every meeting you have into something more productive. Where are we starting from, and where are we trying to get to by the end of this meeting? And we have to start with where we're starting. So that brings us to the first leadership motion, orient honestly. We all probably understand that if you want to go farther and get there faster, you need to be aligned with your team. We all think about being aligned on where we're going, but we often overlook what might be even more important. We need to be aligned on where we are now. So, for example, assuming a world before Google Maps and mobile devices, let's say you need to meet your team in Albuquerque and you're in Denver, and you have some primitive take a left at the gas station kind of directions, which you distribute to the rest of your team. Well, if half of your team is starting in Miami, don't be surprised if they don't find you in Albuquerque. The same path will not take you to the same destination if you're starting from a different place. The way that you approach a problem, and really the nature of the problem itself, is dictated in large part by your starting conditions. Treatments for early stage diseases can be radically different from treatments for later stages of the same disease. The outcome is the same, right? You want to be disease-free, but the treatment is different because the starting point is different. You do different things to solve the same problem when your starting conditions are different. So Orient Honestly says, figure out where you are now. And Barbara Minto gives us a tool for this. Barbara Minto was in the first class of women to graduate Harvard Business School in 1963, and she was the first female MBA hired at McKinsey, where she developed a way to approach strategy that's still how McKinsey practices it today, more than 50 years later. It's called the Minto Pyramid Principle. There's a book on it. You should check it out. For those of you who know it, we're going to focus on just the top half of Minto's pyramid, the SCQA. SCQA stands for Situation, Complication, Question, and Answer. And it's a way to structure your thinking to make it easier for others to process or to help sell an idea, or in our case, just to understand where we are. In our situation, we need to meet in Albuquerque, and we have driving directions from Denver to Albuquerque. The complication is that not everyone is starting in Denver. This gives us a very clear understanding of our problem, and that helps us figure out an answer. So let's go back to our printer situation. We started out knowing the question, should we buy a printer? And that's a pretty normal place to start. People often stack up a load of personal context and assumptions and then just ask a question. The problem with the question as a starting point is that it's so easily contestable. People can just say no without any visible reasoning. They're employing their own internal set of assumptions to do that, right? So we need to go back up and look at the situation and understand what's making that situation complicated. And when we detail the situation and the complication, it provides clarity. So the situation is, we've been getting a lot of new business leads, about 10 qualified deals in the pipeline at any time. Each one gets a 10-page proposal, including spreadsheets that need to be edited and proofread. And clients also want printed proposals to review during sales meetings. Remember, this was back in 2002 when people still printed stuff. And the complication is that with only one salesperson to handle all that load, reading that much stuff on screen really kind of sucks. And it's causing fatigue and headache and mistakes. And the salesperson needs to run to the print shop multiple times a week to print. Then we get to the question, should we buy a printer? Our situation and complication is our point A, summarized here. And in our point A, we've clearly articulated the pain that's being felt and the impact it's having on the business. With that visibility, each of the partners is now approaching the problem from the same starting point. Making the decision at this point is really obvious. So, for the purpose of orienting honestly, we're going to focus on just the S and the C of SCQA. We need to understand the situation and the complication. So with Barbara Minto's method in mind, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to take the challenge statement you wrote out before, and on a fresh sheet of paper or a fresh Post-it note, write out answers to these 2 questions. Where are you now? That's the situation. And what makes it difficult? That's your complication. For that first part, think about what is the current situation? What are your hard-won, durable markers of progress? And for the second bit, the complication, think about what makes the situation difficult. What are the points of tension, messiness, or uncertainty? Why is this a challenge in the first place? Is there sufficient alignment on where you are now to move forward? Or does someone on your team think you're starting from Miami? Okay? Start a 2-minute timer and come back when you're done. When we detail the situation and the complication, it provides clarity. So the situation here, we have been getting a lot of new business leads, about 10 qualified deals in the pipeline at any time. Each one gets a 10-page proposal, including spreadsheets that need to be edited and proofread, and clients also want printed proposals to review during sales meetings. Remember, this was back in 2002, so people actually printed documents and read them out. Our complication, with only one salesperson to handle that load, reading that much on screen sucks. It's causing fatigue and headache and mistakes, and the salesperson needs to run to Kinko's multiple times a week to print. Kinko's is now FedEx. This was a long time ago. So then the question is, should we buy a printer? Now, I'll give you another minute to see if you can rewrite your situation and complication into one or two brief declarative sentences. I want you to combine them and see if that makes any shift in how you're thinking about it. And we're going to call that combination of the two your point A. Here are a couple examples of what that might sound like. So, our company needs to release our software product in 18 months, but the current plan will take 3 years. We don't know how to change the plan, and some people don't even think it's possible. Or, we need to decide whether to enter into a deal with Microsoft, and our strategy team has presented great arguments both for and against. Right? That one's really clear. You can see how it's the situation is the first clause, and the complication is the second clause. This last one, this is one that I've experienced more times than I would like to admit. We have a fixed amount of money to award in pay increases this year, and it's not enough to give everyone what they really deserve. Okay? So, a couple of examples here of a good situation and complication combined. See if you can take yours, combine it into a very brief little package, and set a timer for 2 minutes. Come back when you're ready. Okay, now that we've taken our first big step, we're going to take just a moment to reflect on what we've done so far. So I want you to take 3 to 5 minutes to think about these questions. What surprised you about this activity? Did anything jump out? How do you see your challenge in a new way after writing out the situation and the complication clearly? Did breaking it into 2 parts clarify the "where are you now" question? Set a timer for 3 to 5 minutes and come back after you've thought about these things. All right, that brings us to the second leadership motion, valuing outcomes. So let's use sailing as a metaphor. I live near the San Francisco Bay, which is a huge shipping port. So let's say I'm in a boat and I want to get to Angel Island, which is out in the middle of the bay. But as I come out from underneath the bay bridge, there's a huge container ship in the way. I can stick to my plan of taking a straight line from the dock out to the island and smash into the side of the ship, or I can change my plan and move around the ship, right? Most of us have been trained to set concrete and measurable goals, and these are usually framed as activities or outputs like write a book or hit a sales target or deliver a product feature. And while these sorts of measures have an important place, when you prioritize the outcomes that you are trying to achieve above those deliverables, you create a flexibility that allows you to respond to unforeseen circumstances, like the big ship that gets in the way. So getting to the island safely is the outcome that I care about, but the path that I take needs to be flexible to account for learning and changing conditions. And what this means is that if you commit to a plan that's actually filled with specific activities, it's possible to complete those activities without achieving your goal. I've seen many organizations that mistake effort for achievement. Don't do that. All right, so Janice currently advises a startup that's making a carbon-free Mach 9 hypersonic spaceplane, which might be the coolest sentence I've ever said. Last year, the CEO defined one of their goals as make fire, not ship version 3 of the rocket because maybe version 3 turns out to be terrible, so they scrap it and leapfrog straight to version 4. Or maybe there's a way to tweak version 2 to make it work. They're free to do whatever will get them to the outcome. An engine that makes fire. That's all that really matters. Everything else is just an implementation detail. You can see here how make fire is different from the outputs and the activities, right? Of course, you have to do things, maybe even make real objects like a reusable test stand. But you can see here that the work you do is not the same as the outcome that the work is intended to achieve. Just as a side note, they did achieve this outcome, and it's crazy cool. So how do we think about outcomes? Generally speaking, outcomes are not things that we possess, like a book or a code base or a product feature. They're things that we can do, like generate tens of thousands of pounds of thrust. Right? We want to ask the question, what will be different in the world when we have resolved our challenge? That's the outcome. What can we do that we couldn't do before? And sure, there's lots of nuance, but don't get caught up in pedantry. What's important is knowing how to separate the things that you need to do in support of your goal and the goal itself. And I can illustrate this with an example of an outcome-oriented roadmap. So we made this when we were setting up a vacation home in Minnesota. We like to cook and we like good food, so having a working kitchen was a priority for us. And you can see how we have activities and outputs that support outcomes like we can cook dinner for the first few nights. This also shows how the outcomes represent things that are different in the world. And while the outputs are essential, those objects are not the same as what we can do with them. Same with activities. For example, in that first column, the activity is go to Target. But we might find that when we go to the grocery store up the street, maybe they have a frying pan and they have paper plates and plastic forks, and we don't need to go to Target, right? So sticking with the plan is not the essential part as long as we are solving for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. When we talk about the outcomes in our printer situation, these come to mind. The salesperson is less exhausted from the proposal generation process and can spend more time working with customers to close deals. So then we have a point B, right? With our point A and point B articulated together, where we are starting from and how do we want the world to be different, it makes it easy to identify possible paths to get from point A to point B and to make a decision. And with this point A and point B, they could have chosen to hire a sales assistant or an admin instead of buying a printer, and they did that about a year later. But you can see with this illustration how having this clarity allows you to make decisions about your path and be flexible. So we're going to do the next activity, which is about our destination, our outcome, our point B. For this activity, I want you to grab your paper or your Post-it notes. And once again, I'd like you to come up with 10 items. Write one item per sticky if you've got them, or make a list if you're working on regular paper. This is a thinking fast brain dump. And here's your prompt. Going back to the problem that you chose to solve at the beginning, what will you do or make or achieve through the course of resolving this situation? That is, what activities will you engage in? What things will you make, and what outcomes will you see? We're thinking about all three here, all right? 10 items, one item per sticky. What will you do, make, or achieve through the process of resolving your challenge statement? Set timer for 3 minutes and come back when you're done. Now, I want you to divide your stickies into 3 piles if you've got stickies. If you're working just on regular paper with a list, I want you to put a letter next to each one of the items on your list, okay? And it's going to be A for activities, D for deliverables, because we can't use both O for outputs and O for outcomes. So put an A for activities, D for deliverables, and O for outcomes, all right? And if you're working with Post-its, put those in piles. Activities on the left, deliverables in the middle, outcomes on the right. Take 2 to 3 minutes to do this. Pause the video, come back when you're ready. Okay, now take a look at your outcomes and see if you can choose one that really represents the thing that you're working towards. this is your point B. And you can massage it a bit if you want. If maybe there are a couple of outcomes that are kind of similar, like see if you can munge them together, go ahead and take a minute or two to do that. Come back to the video. Okay. Now, having used the first two leadership motions, we've created a point A and a point B. And creating your point A and your point B, especially with the inclusion of others on your team if you've got a team, helps drive alignment and ensures that everyone is working to get from the same place to the same place. Okay, we're going to take another minute here to reflect on what we've done in this section of the workshop. So I want you to take 3 to 5 minutes to think about these questions. What are the differences that you've observed between activities, outputs, and outcomes? And does having a clear point B help you think about how to resolve your challenge? Okay? Set a timer for a few minutes. Come back when you're ready. Now that you know where you are and what you're trying to accomplish, you need to get there quickly and easily. And you have people who can help you with that. Leveraging the brains means getting the most out of yourself and your team. And there are many ways to do that, but they all start with having the right team. So we want to include a small number of the right people for cross-functional, multi-level, multicultural collaboration. The research is in, and the results are conclusive. Diverse teams are more productive, and diversity is not just racial, ethnic, or religious, it's cross-functional, cross-level, and cross-organizational. People from different backgrounds with different experiences see different aspects of your challenge, and they can help cover for your blind spots. So given that, we think that there are 3 kinds of people that should be involved in any collaboration. 1, the people with the authority to make a decision. 2, the people with subject matter expertise. And 3, the people who have to live with the outcome of any decision or course of action. Big secret here, these people are actually subject matter experts. They're just the neglected kind. So we want to avoid inviting everyone to the party if possible. We want to try and keep it tight. And you might ask, if I should include only 3 or 4 people, what about the 15 or 20 people who sit behind and around them? And the answer is, if you don't actually need those people, do whatever you can to trim them out. Sometimes it's a necessary evil for political reasons or other perfectly valid reasons, so be pragmatic. Use good judgment. Include someone if they have to be there, right? But remember the rule, n times n minus 1 divided by 2. And remember the printer. If Janice had been able to limit the group of people she was working with to just these 3, this group would have reached a decision in a couple of hours, or maybe even minutes, right? Peter had the financial control. He had the authority to say yes. Wanda was the outside sales expert who could have said, duh, you need a printer. And Janice was the person who had to live with the consequences, who could articulate the pain that was being felt by not having a printer. These 3 people together could have made it happen. So let's apply that thinking to your challenge. I want you to write 1 name per sticky, or again, make a list if you're on regular paper, of all the people who are involved in your challenge right now. Okay? So take 2 minutes and just name every single person who's currently involved in resolving your challenge. Pause, set a timer for 2 minutes, come back when you're done. Now, divide those people into 4 piles. The people who need to or can say yes, the people who hold the knowledge that you need, the subject matter experts, the people who have to implement or live with the resolution, and finally, everyone else. See if you can take all those names and divide them into 4 piles. If you're working on paper, see if you can put symbols next to each name. Maybe one type gets a star, one gets a triangle, one gets a circle, and one gets a square. But take 2 to 3 minutes and identify each of these 4 categories of people on your list. Okay? Pause and come back. All right, we're going to take another moment to reflect here. So let's answer these questions. What surprised you about this activity? How would it help if you could collaborate with just one person from each of those 3 stacks that you have, or those 3 lists? What could you do to empower one person from each list to represent their constituency more effectively? And finally, have you been inviting a lot of extra people to your meetings? Take a couple minutes and think about these things. Come back when you're ready. So before we go on to the last leadership motion, I want to answer this question. Now that we have the right people in the room, how do we make the most out of them? And the answer is this pattern. Now, many of you have done this kind of pattern millions of times before, and this is the heart of leveraging the brains. Leveraging the brains is about getting the most out of your team in terms of information and processing power. And basic facilitation tools like brainstorming exercises help us to get information out of our heads and into a workable space, organize that information in meaningful ways, describing it, categorizing it, and finally focusing on the parts that matter. This process not only helps squeeze more horsepower from your team, it also drives alignment across your team. We're working together and we're working out in the open, and this allows everyone to see all the same information and to have input on how that information is organized, which in turn sheds light on how they're interpreting the information. Then when it's time to focus, people are more likely to be aligned and be flexible because they worked with each other instead of working at each other. I have a whole one-day workshop that's just on mastering these techniques. So if you're interested, hit me up and we can talk about it. And at last, our 4th leadership motion, make durable decisions. These are work boot decisions, right? It doesn't have to be pretty, but it does have to last. So when making a good enough decision, there are really only 2 considerations that matter, and any option you move forward with has to satisfy both criteria. The first, will it last? And the second, does it progress you towards your point B? Once you eliminate all the other options, anything left over is going to be good enough. So there are 2 ways that decisions commonly fail. The first is that we take too much time to make them. This time is costly. You might hear people saying things like, we never make decisions, or we've been talking about this forever, or do we all agree that this is the right choice? And here's how we get into trouble. Our standards for quality are too high. We want the best decision, or we have to be certain that we're making the right choice. Or our standards for support are too high. We insist on consensus, and we invest too much energy in getting everyone to agree. These unrealistic standards slow us down or stall us out. The second way decisions fail is when we make fragile decisions. And this can be really fast initially, but it costs us later when we have to rework the decision. And it sounds like this. Wait, we decided that? Or, I thought we made a different choice. Or, they're just going to change their minds next week. How many of you have walked out of a meeting room feeling or knowing that the decision that was made in that room is never going to go anywhere? I've worked with a lot of people who have had that experience. So we get here through low decision support, when we make unilateral decisions or we don't include the necessary people, and through poor diligence. We're just guessing, or we're going with our gut, or we're being reactive. And this can be fast, but it's chaotic. Inadequate standards means decisions are fragile. And this creates an environment where quick decisions are easily reversed, revisited, and overridden. And this erodes trust, and the environment becomes chaotic, with people working to cross purposes. And this impedes progress. The durable decision mindset solves for both of these. It sounds like, I don't love it, but I'll support you 100%. Or, this is how we can proceed until we get new data. We spend just the right amount of time on it, so it's fast but strong. The Goldilocks zone of decision making. We have the right level of support, that is, people can live with it, they're willing to disagree and commit, and the right level of diligence. We have enough information to make this move, we've looked at enough options, we know it will move us forward, it's clearly helpful. Often the best way to get here is to take a smaller, more iterative approach. Instead of deciding that we're going to write a book, let's commit to writing a few blog posts over the next 2 weeks. We'll learn more and can expand on that decision after we have more data. So we're going to work on right-sizing your decisions. First, I want you to write down on your paper one decision that needs to be made to move your situation from point A to point B. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. So set a timer, pause the video, and come back when you're ready. Okay, now I want you to take 3 to 5 minutes and answer these questions. 1, is there a proposal that everyone can live with? 2, do we have enough data? 3, have we looked at enough options? 4, does this potential solution move us in the right direction? 5, is it clearly helpful? Okay? 3 to 5 minutes answering these questions. Pause the video and come back when you're ready. All right. What could you do to turn that decision into something small but significant? How could you frame it for your team so that they could agree to move forward? Remember, instead of writing a book, think about writing a couple of blog posts. What's a smaller commitment that moves you in the right direction but is easier to move forward with? Go ahead and set a timer for 2 or 3 minutes. Come back when you've got it. Okay, it's time for our final reflection. So this time we're going to set a timer again for about another 5 minutes or so, and I want you to think about these questions. 1, how does your organization typically make decisions? 2, what level of decision quality do they seek? This is all the way from the best decision down to just gut instinct. 3, what level of decision support do they seek? This is from consensus to absolutely unilateral. Finally, how successful is that? And do you think that you could do better? All right. Set a timer for about 5 minutes. Think about these questions and come back when you're done. All right. So to round things out, we'll come back to this slide. Every day, we all work really hard to get things done, but we're blocked for countless reasons. But if you want to make progress and reduce drama in just about any situation, spin the spinner. Take a minute to orient honestly on the problem, understand the outcomes you're trying to achieve as opposed to the things that you would do to achieve them. Identify the people who can or should help and the people who are actually slowing things down unnecessarily, and seek to understand the nature of the decision you're trying to make to ensure you're targeting the right level of decision quality and decision support. And you can go farther, faster, and with far less drama. Awesome. So, hey, I hope you've enjoyed today's workshop. Check out the book. Connect with me on LinkedIn. If you've got questions, please feel free to hit me up. I'm always happy to answer questions. Go ahead and put stuff in the comments. Don't forget to like and follow. Thanks a lot. I'll see you in the next workshop.